Hiya. So it's me again, and you already know what we're going to be talking about today. The videos that have been posted over the past couple of days have been nothing short of endless, and the somewhat barrage, if you will, towards Nexon has been kind of non-stop. So I guess I'm gonna be adding my 2 cents, the fuel to the fire. I was kind of debating on whether I was gonna do it or not. But I was asked by a good friend if I would, actually give my opinion on the matter. So, um, credit to Jose or Maple Bench, is why I'm here and why I'm making this video. On the current state of Maplestory. Yay! Another one of these videos. Woo! Okay, awesome. Um, Personally, I've been playing Reboot for around 4 to 5 years, and I have seen the game progress ever since the release of Morass. Yes, the level 230 region in the middle of the Arcane River. I've pretty much been playing since the release of that. I've seen Will and all of these new bosses and new content get released. And I can confidently say that Reboot, Global Maplestory in general, is in a much better spot than what it used to be. But push comes to shove, there still are issues with the game that need to be addressed. The big three, personally, in my opinion, the big three offenders of this game is overseas content, so content that is not in KMS, class balancing and class rerolling, and Oz. I think these are the three biggest issues in the game that need to be addressed because every single one of these things have game breaking aspects that are not enjoyable to play around. So, firstly, I want to talk about overseas content because I think it's the biggest hindrance to Maplestory right now. Now, I don't think that the ideas that get brought in from overseas content are necessarily bad, right? I think familiars are a pretty good idea, given there's issues with them. I think housing is a pretty good idea, but there's issues with it. And that's pretty much the story that comes along with all overseas content. The ideas are good, but there's not enough funding behind it to actually make these concepts work. Especially when the direction of the game is going towards KMS or just the original version of the game. For example, in Ignition, we got totems removed to move ourselves in a direction closer towards KMS. But then, lo and behold, as Ignition starts rolling out, we get the Misty Island patch that introduces new legacy items that affect progression for players in different ways, right? Now, I don't think it's all progression related, or the reason all of these issues exist is because it's progression related. A lot of the content that comes out from overseas content unironically breaks the game. The game stops to function the moment an overseas patch drops. My proof? Go look at Destiny. Destiny fixed the game entirely. I would not crash, or many players would not crash for multiple hours in the same session. The housing patch comes out a couple months afterwards, and what happens the moment that patch comes out? You double click on a character and you crash instantly. Changing channels begins to crash you once again. Or, further down the line, past Ignition, if you enter the cash shop, then you start to crash sometimes for reasons unknown. And I think these small little things can be extremely infuriating. And even when this content does get released, it's extremely inconsistent and it comes with little updates. Classes like Kana, Hayato, and Beast Tamer ever see updates, and that's why they kind of just feel outdated. The only reason why Kana and Beast Tamer are relevant is because of the support that they give to parties, which I think it's nice to have extra supports in the game. Once again, I think the concepts of the classes are cool, they're just not executed upon properly, and Hayato has pretty much just become irrelevant. Hayato's damage is relatively low. They don't fit into the burst meta of the game because everything is revolving around burst because of content like Oz, which I'll get into in just a second. And Jet, what do I have to say about Jet? It won't be a class anymore, so that's interesting. And that's a part of the inconsistencies with overseas content. It gets released only for it to be removed. Singapore has been removed. Fantasy Theme World, what was it called? Bye Bye Station? I don't remember exactly what it was called. That's been removed. Monad has been removed. Jet is being removed. And just all of this overseas content sees no commitment, which is fairly frustrating. So a lot of people have this question in their heads is like, should I actually spend time, interacting with this content? Like, should somebody main a Hayato? Like, I really don't think that anybody should be maining a GMS class. Considering that the updates that those classes get are relatively next to none. And even just the content, right? Like Monad, content-wise is, you don't really get much from it, and clearly they don't plan on continuing Monad, especially if it gets removed. But like, it's such an issue when the development team decides that we want to move in a direction towards KMS, and then we start releasing overseas and like GMS specific content. It's kind of weird, and all of this exists. And I kind of agree with Coppersan in this regard that there is no communication. The communication doesn't exist. In one patch, we'll say that we're moving in one direction, and then we move towards the other in another patch without any explanation whatsoever, or as to why things are happening. Why is Jet getting removed? Why is content getting removed like Monad, considering that a lot of people actually did interact and play with that content? I think honesty would go a very, very long way in terms of overseas content. Now, the next thing that I actually want to talk about is a problem that I've been experiencing a lot recently, and that's the class balancing and class rerolling that exists in Maplestory. Class balancing has pretty much never been good in this game. Some classes will seem blatantly overpowered in comparison to others. My first case in point being Bishop. Bishop pretty much does some of the highest damage in the game, while providing the only, relative support in the game. Like, it is the only support class, like, set in stone support class in the game, because it actually supports your party, and it has some of the best mobbing in the game. That is an example of a class that's extremely overpowered. Or, for example, Night Lord. Why is Night Lord overpowered? Because it does pretty much all of the damage that it needs to do in comparison to all other classes in 15 seconds. And then you don't need to play the game. Now, obviously, class balancing across 47 classes isn't something that's necessarily easy, and I understand that. If we know that class balancing isn't going to be perfect, then the option to reroll classes should be a thing in Maplestory, right? I shouldn't be punished given that much for having to reroll my class just because my class is not in a good state when new jobs or new balance patches get released. So, for example, if I wanted to swap off of Cannoneer, for example, I have to do the entirety of my Arcane River dailies again, and I have to wait literal years just to build up my Sacred again to the point that it was. along with having to level my class and get the gear again, which I understand, right? In terms of getting the gear and leveling, that should be mandatory for a class, especially considering that a system like Legion is in the game. But when I have to do the entirety of my Arcane River dailies and the entirety of my Sacred Force dailies just to get to the point that I was, again, with no way to speed up progression, it can be very concerning. And there is a lot of frustrations with picking a class and then it being relatively underpowered in comparison to other classes. And obviously, rerolling classes isn't too big of an issue when you just get started. Obviously, because your progression isn't that far. But for example, other games, just to name one, Final Fantasy XIV gives you the option to pick your class. You get to choose what class you want to be and use that class moving forward. That fluidity just doesn't exist in Maplestory, especially considering when you get to the end game, there are other systems like Genesis where you have to wait 8 months to get the best weapon in the game again. Given that you can already clear the Black Mage and you're probably already strong enough to clear the Black Mage even if you got an arcane weapon once again. So I think that picking classes and choosing between different classes should be more flexible in Maplestory, considering that the time commitment to the game itself just to progress and move forward once you get to those later stages takes so long. Picking a class that you deem fit for the content that's being released should not be that much of an issue. Granted, I do think players should get punished for rerolling their classes. I don't think somebody who's constantly moving between classes should be getting all of their strength back in an instant, but there should be options to actually speed up progression to return to the point that you once were. Now, the last thing that I want to talk about probably doesn't affect a lot of players, but this has been an outstanding problem in the game for at least 6 to 7 years and affects the core community of the players. What am I talking about? None other than Oz. Oz is terrible in every way. It breaks the balance of the game, the content hardly functions, and it's not like enjoyable content at all. Obviously, that last point is subjective and doesn't really mean anything, but the first two definitely hold true, and obviously that has a negative impact on Maplestory as a whole. Oz basically is jump quest content that you get through that basically rewards you with an Oz box. You open an Oz box to get a specific type of ring. And now the two most notable rings from these boxes are the Ring of Restraint and the Weapon Jump rings, which basically the Ring of Restraint gives you 100% of your attack for 15 seconds, and the Weapon Jump ring gives you 400% stat, based on the base attack power of your weapon. So for example, let's say I'm using a Genesis cannon, and my Genesis cannon has 400 base attack power. So you take that, multiply it by 400, and all of that stat, which is probably equivalent to like 1.6k, also gets affected by all of the percentages that exist on your gear and gives you that much stat. So what these rings do is they give you a lot of burst damage. And burst damage is what makes the meta so prevalent in Maplestory, because you can bind a boss and stun it and get all of your burst damage out without any hindrance, without any obstacles that you need to avoid. And because your burst damage is so prevalent and overpowered with things like Bishop and the Ring of Restraint, that's how a meta is formed. And the meta is very unhealthy for the game, and this is part of the reason why the class balancing is even further exacerbated. Oz is definitely an issue, to say the least. Even in terms of the content itself, Oz hardly functions. a lot of the times when you're interacting with Oz, there are bugs that exist in Oz, and Oz as a concept in general, is like it's not good, and it's like it's extremely unhealthy because it produces another instance of like insane gotcha tier RNG to the game, where essentially somebody can dump hundreds of hours and get no useful item from Oz, whereas one person can open a single box and get the best ring in the game, which I think is extremely concerning. There is no pity in Oz, and the odds for getting the Ring of Restraint and the Weapon Jump Ring at a useful level is extremely low. That's pretty much all I have to say about Oz. Everybody knows that Oz is terrible. Now, the last thing that I want to say before I go is obviously that change can only happen when there are voices behind it, and powerful ones, right? Obviously, when the community is a mess and everybody's talking about different things and want different things changed, and there isn't a clear-cut voice on what needs to be done first to move forward, then nothing will get done. So essentially what I'm saying is do your best to communicate with others. It's not even just communication from Nexon's perspective, it's communication from our perspective. When we say what we want clearly and effectively and efficiently, a lot less gets lost in translation. And obviously there can be work done on both sides. I'm not saying that Nexon is the holy saint. It's a, like, it goes both ways. And obviously there are issues on both sides that need to be fixed and that need to be worked on. And given that we can, collaborate efficiently, I think Maple will continue to grow and become a much better game for people to enjoy. Once again, I've grown up with this game and I want to see it grow. Yeah, I don't spend all of my time on this game just for it to fail and collapse, right? So that's part of the reason why I thought about it again and decided to make this video. Hoping that it would go out there and at least reach someone, something, and hopefully make an impact for a better Maplestory. So hopefully you guys enjoyed. Remember to like, comment, and sub, or I will literally eat your mestos faster than Star Forcing does. Also, actually, before I go, if you have any comments, questions, or concerns, please feel free to leave your comments, opinions, or whatever down below. Good comments. The best comment will get pinned. Smile. Okay, I'm going. Bye.